Chapter 10. The People of the Forest. The sun shone bright on Mireth's face, filling her with a pleasant warmth all over. Yet at the same moment her body cried out in anguish against the constant travel that was beginning to wear on her. For the first time since her childhood lay dead at her feet, Mireth was beginning to feel like a human being again. Yet at the same moment the old familiar rage and drive to hunt the beasts was growing at a steady rate the closer they marched to her prey. At this moment, Mireth could see the edge of the forest she had spent so long stalking. A fierce wind blew, and the trees swayed, beckoning her to lose herself among them again. To the south, she could just barely make out the ruined husk of what had once been her village, back when her life made sense. Elysian and Adamare had made the case to the group that they should leave Tharnas before the soldiers were ready to accompany them. They had said it would be best to scout out the situation with their small group and then await reinforcements. Mireth welcomed any excuse to leave the city, wanting nothing more than to press on towards her goal. Old images sprang to her mind one after the other, adventuring with Maribel on a sunny day, finding her father on the floor, the first blood she had ever spilled, the fight with her mother, holding Maribel close for one last time. Mireth needed a distraction. She urged her horse forward and caught up to Adamare. She had been trying to be more open with him lately, to come to him for conversation. Did not come naturally to her, and more often than not, he did by far the majority of the talking. She had very little interest to talk about that. She had very little of interest to talk about that didn't hurt her, and Lorinar was the only one she felt comfortable talking with about her past. As she approached him, she noticed a faraway look in his eyes. He didn't seem to notice that she was even there. Mireth's courage faltered, and she wondered if maybe she shouldn't speak with him. Determined, she found her resolve and spoke. "Adamare," she said. He shook his head as if coming to. "Ah, Mireth. Sorry, I was just, thinking." "What has you so deep in thought?" He looked away from her into the forest. For a moment, the only sound was the persistent clicking of the horse's hooves on the dirt road and the howling wind across the open plain. Mireth felt unease creeping into her mind. This was unlike Adamare to be so measured and slow to speak. "Oh, just about the mission, that's all." Mireth couldn't think of anything else to say, so they walked on in silence for a while. She began to wonder what had changed that he seemed so disinterested in conversation with her. Had he only pressed her for conversation before because she was a mystery, a challenge to him? Now that she was approaching him to talk, did his interest now wane? Most importantly, why did she care so much about whether or not he wanted to talk to her? Not so long ago, she would have rather walked along in silence as they were now. Had Lorinar's words gotten to her that much? The sun was reaching the edge of the horizon when the party came to the border of the forest. They dismounted their horses to lead them by their reins, for the forest was thick and they wanted to be as inconspicuous as possible. Stepping past the first trees cleared Mireth's mind like little else could. Elysian marked strange runes on the bark of a tree with the end of his staff as they entered the forest. The runes glowed for a moment, but then faded to barely visible marks on the trunk of the tree. These runes would allow for the soldiers from Tharnas to follow them through the forest. "So then," Nolendil said, "where do we find these werewolves of Ellenbra?" All eyes turned to Mireth. "Deep in this forest there is a cave." A piercing howl interrupted her, sending chills to her bones. Instinctively, she grasped her bow and pulled an arrow from her quiver, letting her horse's reins fall loose. She turned to face the direction of the sound just as a frenzied battle cry came from the same direction. Mireth crouched low and then took off at a sprint towards the sounds. She waited for no one, she did not hesitate, and in moments she was a hunter, a beast, a creature of passion and instinct. Trees rushed by one after the other. Her hood fell to her shoulders, her hair flying free behind her head. She was singular in focus. Soon she came upon a sight strange to her. There stood among the trees a cluster of crude houses, most of which stood only as tall as she did. She came to a halt and saw among these houses a scene of chaos and carnage. Half a dozen werewolves stood among them, making them seem even more miniature in contrast to their bulky masses. They hacked with their claws at a strange group of people who stood little taller than Mireth's waist. These short forest people fought ferociously, but to little avail. None of them appeared to have any weapons as far as Mireth could see. Mireth could not allow the carnage to continue. She bellowed as loudly as she could, drawing the attention of all of the werewolves to her. As the creatures turned their heads, some of the small people used this opportunity to pounce on their foes. Mireth admired their courage. The closest of the werewolves came bounding to her position, and she wasted no time firing her first arrow at the monster's head. The werewolf managed just in time to move out of the way of the arrow as he continued towards her position. She quickly knocked another arrow and fired again. This time the creature did not have enough time to move, and the arrow pierced his skull, sending it crashing down on the forest floor. Out of the corner of her eye, Mireth saw Adamir come bounding past her and towards the werewolves. His sword flashed through the air and sent blood spraying from the chest of the beast. Mireth knocked another arrow and shot another werewolf as it tried to flank him. Adamir cried out as he attacked the same werewolf again, with a ferocity that struck Mireth as out of character for the normally calm and precise Magi. A deep, commanding howl came from the village, drawing Mireth's attention. She turned to see a werewolf that stood larger than any of the others, howling with its head back. Upon the beast was a strange red mark that seemed so vivid as to almost glow. It spread in strange tendrils across the creature's chest, reminiscent of twisted tree branches. In response, all of the remaining werewolves perked up at attention, and then quickly turned and fled from the scene. The large one finished its howl, but then stood for a moment where it was, its cold black eyes turned towards Mireth as if sizing her up. The flickering light of a nearby torch reflected in them was mesmerizing. She hesitated only a moment before lifting her bow to fire, but it was too late. The creature bounded into the forest and out of her range. It took all of the willpower that Mireth could muster to keep herself from running into the woods after them. She reminded herself that they were much faster than her, and that patience was her biggest advantage. She told herself that these villagers were the more pressing concern, to make certain that they were safe and to understand who they were. She turned and saw that the others had already arrived, weapons in hand. Strange, Nolendil said. They recognized they were outnumbered and fled. Does that not seem too intelligent for their kind to anyone else? I was under the impression that these creatures had only the instincts of basest animals. True, Mireth said, but even the common wolf knows to flee when a situation grows too dire for their success. This is normal behavior for werewolves. Even as she said the words, she could feel unease growing inside of her. Something did feel off about the way that werewolf looked at her. As they spoke, they were approached by an elder-looking villager bearing a torch. The wizened man bore a graying beard that grew nearly to his waist in length. His clothes were dark and unrefined, their material a mystery to Mireth in the low light. The elder bowed low and spoke to them, his words meaningless to their ears. "I'm sorry, sir," Lorinar said, "but do you speak common?" The man looked at her with a confused expression and spoke more words they did not understand. "Allow me," said Elysian. "I know a spell that will allow me to hear his words as if in my tongue, and for him to hear mine as if they were in his. Just give me a moment." Elysian spoke a string of strange, archaic words as he made expressive motions with his hand. Mireth wondered idly if those were necessary or for show. "I'm sorry, good sir," he said, "but could you repeat what you had said to us again? I will translate for you." The elder smiled and spoke, and Elysian repeated his words to the others after him. "I welcome you to our humble village, and thank you kindly for your aid. At any other time we would have turned you away, for we have no love for outsiders who do not understand our ways. We cannot, however, under these circumstances, afford to turn away those who know far more about fighting than we Magicians ever have." "Good sir," Mireth said, as Elysian repeated it to the elder, "I was raised in a village just outside of these forests, and I spent many a year wandering these wilds. How is it that I have neither seen nor heard of your people?" The elder smiled. "Because we did not wish to be seen or known. Elysian paused his translation for a moment. "The best translation I can give is spell singers? Devised a way to hide us from prying eyes. We have lingered many a year among these trees." Mireth eyed the strange barbaric forest dwellers with suspicion. How many years had she spent alone in despair in these forests, and yet there lived a peaceful people here? Had they seen her, a young girl alone in the woods, and never offered her aid or shelter? "If you are so skilled at remaining undetected, how then have the wolves found you?" The elder frowned deeply. "We hid ourselves from sight, but the werewolves have far keener smell than any other. Many long years we avoided conflict with those abominations of creation because their efforts were elsewhere. Long we thought that the humans had killed them all, but recent months have proven otherwise." "Why were you fighting those werewolves unarmed?" Adamir asked. "We have no weapons. We are peaceful people." "But surely you could have used tools as improvised weapons, perhaps an axe or something like that?" We bear none of these. We cut no trees. We only eat that which the forest gives us, fruits which we eat and then return to the earth. We are a part of this forest. It is not a tool for us to use for survival." "Fascinating. Tell me what sort of methods you use." "Adamir, please," Nolendil interrupted. "We don't have time for your interrogation. Elder, what is your name?" "Taga is what I am called. I am the speaker of this tribe." "Taga, you are troubled by the werewolves. We have come to these forests in search of those creatures. It seems that we share a common purpose. In exchange for any information that you have that will help us in our journey, we will do our best to protect this village and to eliminate the threat of those werewolves." Mireth held the grip of her bow tight. They were close now, so very close to the werewolves. She could only truly rest when the last of their blood was spilled on the soil beneath her feet. Though it was too dark to see past the edge of the village, she peered out in the direction those werewolves had run. "Father, Maribel, we will have our revenge." Adamir slung his quiver on his back as he crept low out of the door of the mud hut the villagers had given him to stay in. As he stepped forward, he listened closely for any sign of movement. He could hear the revelry still going on around the village center. His senses felt keener than they ever had before. He wondered if this was a side effect of the disease that continued to progress inside of him. He walked out past a scattered mess of huts to the edge of the village and out into the trees. There waiting for him was Lycian, leaning on a tree, idly spinning his staff with his hand. The wizard looked up at him and motioned with a nod. Adamir stood up straight, and the two of them began to walk into the dark forest. "This doesn't feel right," Adamir said. "All of this secret keeping and sneaking around." "You're right. This feels wrong, but I believe it's the wisest course of action. Why get the group worried about it when we do not even know if the werewolves have what we need? If they do not, then we return and none need know what transpired. If they do, we will consider our options openly with the group. Does that seem fair?" Adamir thought about it for a moment. And Lycian's logic seemed sound. Why create unnecessary drama where there wasn't any before? He scratched his skin as the persistent itch reasserted itself. "Well, we had best move quickly. I don't know how many more sunsets I can handle." Mireth lay on her back in the hut, wide awake. She was restless, with so many thoughts running through her mind in a loop. All of the tragedies rehearsed themselves before her. All of the creatures she had slain flashed before her eyes. She could not lie there any longer. She stood to her feet and grabbed her bow, and set out to practice her archery. As Mireth began to exit her hut, she heard movement from one of the adjacent buildings. She pulled her head back into the doorway and peered out in the direction of the sound. To her surprise, she saw Adamir come creeping out from this hut. The Magi stopped for a moment, waiting and listening, before crouching low and walking away. Mireth's pulse pounded. What was Adamir up to that he would be sneaking around? He had seemed to be acting different lately. Perhaps it had nothing to do with her. What if he had some secret agenda? All of the old fears of hurt and betrayal were rising to the surface again. No, she thought. Adamir is not like that. He must have some good reason to do this, that I just don't understand. Still, she had to know. She crept quietly out from her hut and followed behind him. If he got into danger, she would be there to help him. Hopefully, she would find that he had nothing to hide. She continued after him as he left the village. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And leave a comment down below if you would have followed Adamir if you saw him sneaking around. Till next time.